The court case of Texas v. Johnson took place in 1989. This case established that the burning of an American flag is an act that is protected under the First Amendment right to free speech. This was established when the Supreme Court overturned Gregory Lee Johnson's conviction for illegal desecration of a venerated object. Gregory Lee Johnson was an American civil rights activist and communist who strongly opposed the Reagan administration. Johnson was an American merchant marine. This provided him with opportunities to travel to countries such as Mexico and Panama and to see America's influence on these countries. This was a big factor in the development of his communist views. Here's some background on the case. In this case, Gregory Lee Johnson is put on trial by the state of Texas for violating their law, which prohibits the desecration of a venerated object. This trial ended with Johnson being convicted and later taking his case to the Supreme Court, in hopes of overturning his conviction. The Supreme Court's trial outcome would affect many cases to come and solidify the court's stance on flag burning. The case's rise to national level can be attributed to the controversy of the act that was committed, as well as the fact that this case defined the Supreme Court's opinion on flag burning. This situation went to trial because Johnson's flag burning outraged so many people. It raised to national attention because it raised the question of whether or not the offensive nature of the act warranted a limitation of free speech. Here's an overview of the trial. After burning an American flag in front of the Dallas City Hall during a protest of President Reagan, Gregory Lee Johnson was arrested. The state of Texas put him on trial for desecrating a venerated object. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 1 year in prison and a fine of $2,000. Upon his release, Johnson went to different Texas courts, looking for one to overturn his conviction. Each declined. Finally, the Supreme Court agreed to take his case in March of 1989. The verdict. After careful consideration, the court ruled 5-4 in favor of Johnson. The Supreme Court informed the Texas Court of Appeals that they may not prosecute for flag burning. The impact of the case. This ruling meant big things. It established that the Supreme Court saw political flag burning to be protected under the First Amendment's right to free speech. This resulted in 47 states removing their laws that prohibited flag burning. Texas v. Johnson later affected the trial of the United States v. Eichmann. In response to the ruling of Texas v. Johnson, the United States government decided to put into effect a federal law against flag desecration. Thus began the trial of the United States v. Eichmann, a court case with the goal of removing the newly established federal flag protection law. This case was so important because of the prior ruling in Texas v. Johnson, and the outcome of the U.S. v. Eichmann further strengthened the protection of flag burning as free speech. In conclusion, the court case of Texas v. Johnson, which took place in 1989, established that the burning of the American flag is an act that is protected under the First Amendment right to free speech. This was established when the Supreme Court overturned Gregory Lee Johnson's conviction for illegal desecration of a venerated object.